It's so easy now for the candidate side to basically do the deep research, take your profile, take the company's profile, take the job description, and send a perfect cover letter.
I've actually heard from almost every senior candidate, hey, I saw you posted this on LinkedIn about the company, right? The question I constantly ask myself is, how can I get more scientific on this? How can we get, better the screening piece to then build the best candidate pool possible?
Which you kind of highlighted there is something I think people don't realize is like processes don't always line up between candidates and companies. Welcome to How I Hire, the podcast where we talk with senior go-to-market leaders about how they find, vet, attract, and grow new talent. Today, I'm joined by Tim Geisenheimer. Tim is the CRO at Hatch. It's a conversational AI for call centers. I got to know Tim when he founded Correlated beforehand. We spent a lot of time talking about PLG sales platforms, and Tim's run mobile sales at Twitter. Before that, Tim, it's great to see you today.
Hey, Andy, great to see you.
That's awesome. Well, hey, obviously you're deep in AI right now. And so I've been excited to chat with you just both about how you hire and how you build teams, because I remember getting to know a lot of your team at Correlated. But maybe to start off, I'd love to just get your take on have you seen AI in hiring, and have you used it in any ways, or how are you seeing it evolve?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. We're seeing AI throughout the business here, and hiring and recruiting is one in particular that we see it prevalent. It's simple as writing job descriptions and calibrating on skills and just that content creation, which is very simple and straightforward, but using it for that. All the way to onboarding and how do we create templates and customize plans and using AI just again for content creation, but things that would normally take people on the recruiting or ops side a lot of time and manual effort now can be auto-generated and customized for each new hire in a matter of seconds. So I think we're looking to add it in any number of different ways. And on the recruiting side, I know they're using a couple of different tools. It sounds like to do sourcing, they're AI focused, and do lookalike audiences. So there's a ton of different innovation happening, and we're trying to take advantage, of all of it as best we can.
It's so easy now for the candidate side to personalize, to basically do the deep research, take your profile, take the company's profile, take the job description, and send a perfect cover letter and tailor their resume to be exactly right. How do you find the right ones, right? Has your approach to filtering through all those early stage applications changed? Are you using the recruiters to do that? Or how do you filter out talent?
Yeah. So we have a good recruiting team here at Hatch that, is the primary filter, for inbound. So I think from an inbound perspective, we also just as a company, a little bit more under the radar. We don't have the same, good problem to have that maybe an OpenAI would have, or Anthropic or someone like that, that's going to have just thousands and thousands of applicants every week. So that filter problem is less of a concern for us. We often do a lot more outbound to, candidates and try and find the best ones. So I would say that particular problem is not one that we, really suffer from. But I think what I find starts to distinguish candidates as we're kind of in the middle of a interview process are the ones that are able to follow up quickly with the right emails, often that are maybe synthesizing, notes quickly in a, response based on the conversation we just had. I suspect some of them are using AI tools to help with that and to make it so that the response they're writing is tailored to the conversation we just had over Zoom, as is often the case. So that's where I see kind of maybe some separation, speed of response, and the best candidates are often the ones that are getting back to you right away with a good thank you note.
The follow-up is so important. It's amazing, right? Both ways. But I think the candidates appreciate it as well too. I got to know you when you were CEO of Correlated. I think you built out a neat management team there. I got to know and respect a lot of them as well too. As you think about both Correlated and Hatch, when you need a new role on your executive team, maybe somebody reporting directly to you on your revenue leadership team, how do you go about designing that role, figuring out what you need, and before you really start to go out there and look? How do you do that?
Yeah, I think it starts with the business and kind of where we are, what type go-to-market organization are we building? In the case of Hatch, for example, we're 100% outbound focused. So we don't have a self-serve component or a PLG component. And so outbound is the focus for us. And over the last year, we've built, an SDR team and started to really, hit its stride. So one of the key hires that we've been working on recently is someone to lead that team and really scale it to the next level. And so, looking at, okay, where do we want to take it? What are the goals for the business? We're, goal to go from here to here. How is the SDR team going to play an important part there? So, and then, we know we have to scale, that team a certain way to kind of hit those goals, right? You've been instantly involved in all this planning, these exercises. And so then it becomes, okay, now that we have, we worked a little bit backwards from the top here. We're looking for a certain type of candidate maybe that has had that set of experience, ideally that they've seen maybe that story before, or they're kind of, to use a Jason Lemkin term, they're that stretch candidate that maybe hasn't seen the story, but they seem like they're, right there able to do it. So either one of those profiles could work really well. And then it's a matter of working again with the recruiting team here. That's great to start to screen and understand, okay, who would be kind of a fit based on those criteria and what we need for the business, and go from there. So we put a lot of thought and effort into it, and try and write everything down as best we can and calibrate against it that way.
I love that. Maybe dive in a little bit on the outbound role, like with AI now. How do you are you looking for a different skill set than you were looking 3 to 5 years ago? And how does that profile change?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of things that we're looking at. First of all, I've been doing sort of B2B sales long enough where I've seen a lot of evolutions and the technology and trends that are kind of prevalent. And so, for those of you on the go-to-market side, I remember Jigsaw as the preeminent data provider. You might remember them. So anyway, I don't want to date myself too much here, Andy, but I've seen a few evolutions along the way. And so what's happening today is, at least for us, what we're seeing is that cold calling works really well. And for our ICP, our type of ideal customer, we find that they're often less frequently on LinkedIn. Email isn't as good of a channel. It works, but it's not as good as the phone is. And so the type of team that we're building is very phone-centric. And then there's a whole, probably for a different type of podcast, a whole set of challenges around the data side and, finding the best phone numbers and finding the best people and doing scoring and all that fun stuff. And so I think as far as profiles that we look for, it's, who can we bring into the business at that kind of more junior level, SDR level, that's, willing to get on the phone, is able to learn kind of our business and able to, quickly make that connection with somebody that fits our ICP through that channel.
I love it. Yeah, AI's changed a lot, but it hasn't changed phones. We had this AI. I think there's laws against AI calling, which when those laws change, I think it's going to be really interesting. And then B, I remember at Culture Amp, we had this thing we called the Archie effect. There was this one guy named Archie that he would always do 4 to 6x the pipeline of any other SDR, right? And when we dug into it, it was pretty simple. He just wanted to call. And I think it's both the actual picking up the phone and then the mentality around that as well too that's so powerful in that regard.
Yeah, for sure. And I think screening for the people who are willing to do it. And then, I think also, and I don't want to go too deep into, the go-to-market specifics, but just arming them with as much enablement and data so that they're, focused on connected calls and having those conversations and not wasting time on other things. Then obviously, as part of this leadership search that we were just talking about, enabling them from a training perspective, coaching perspective, how they do all that. It's essential, especially for that kind of more junior role when people are still learning, the ropes on how to do this stuff.
That's neat. Maybe take some of the directs that you've hired over your career. Like, what are outbound tactics that work to get to you, right? Like, so we're not talking about outbound selling, but now like from a candidate perspective, like how do candidates break through to get to Tim?
I think the first thing that I've observed is just trying in the first place. You'd be surprised, so many people just do the online application and then that goes to the recruiter and maybe I see it, maybe I don't, so I think it's super rare for someone to actually say, "Hey, Tim, I saw XYZ role. That looks interesting to me, and your company looks interesting to me, and maybe working with you looks interesting. And so, here's why you should consider me." A few people have done that out of a lot of people that we've considered, and so I almost, maybe I'm opening myself up here for a lot more inbound to me, but I almost always take the call. Actually, if someone's going to take the time to write a personalized note about a specific role that we're hiring for, and we're not hiring for the role unless it's important. So it's on my radar. If it's an open role, we care about it. That's almost a surefire way to get me on the phone with them because it happens so rarely. So I would start with that, and then I would say, if we are in the fortunate place where that starts to happen more, thanks to your podcast, Andy. I think the next piece of advice would be, try to demonstrate, understanding of what we do and why your particular skill set would be a good fit for our business and for what you think the needs of the business might be based on the research you've done. Back to AI quickly. It's so easy to do this research now using something like O3 from ChatGPT. You literally don't even have to be good at a prompt. You just type in, "Hey, tell me about this URL, what their business is," and it will do actually a pretty decent job of that. So, that means that the barrier is raised for me. If you're not doing that, it's kind of a little bit of a head scratcher.
Yeah, I would agree. Right, like my favorite one is, "Do you have any questions for me?" And when that falls dead, your jaw drops. Right, like
I love that. That's a one I do every time. Right? Yeah. What questions do you have for me? And the times when it's been crickets, it's like, okay, well, we're game over here. Unfortunately,
I would agree. So say somebody gets to you, like, what does your interview process look like? Do you have a style? Have you built a kind of a favorite interview question or approach?
Well, I think that one we just talked about is a good one. I do like to hear, put it back on the candidate a bit to, hear how they're thinking about this. One separator is, are we just, another kind of interview they're going through because they need a job or want a job, or are they like legitimately interested in this role at this company and they have a good rationale for why, that I think a lot of people, and it makes sense. Like, I'm nothing against it, but a lot of people are interviewing to get a job for XYZ reason, and that's maybe okay. But ideally, in addition to needing to have employment, they're also excited about the opportunity, and we really want to index towards that. I think other questions for me, these are ones that probably come up in other interviews you've done, or that are fairly common, but I find them instructive, especially for sales. Tell me about a time where you had to show, some grit or perseverance, or where things didn't go your way. How did you respond? I really like to hear from people. So often in interviews, we talk about, all the great things we've done, all the successes we've had. Oh, I grew this from here to here. I beat quota 17 quarters in a row, or whatever it might be. And I think you can learn something from that for sure. But hearing about a time when you were knocked down and got up again, and you hit some personal adversity and got through it, I find sometimes that's instructive too, especially on the sales or go-to-market side. So those are some of the questions that I like to lean on.
Yeah, no, I like that too. I think I always look for somebody that has seen it at great and seen great pattern recognition, and has also been humbled and knows how to kind of get back up, because I think that's really important as well.
Totally.
How do you think about the process, like from a candidate side, particularly in today's market? It's so hard to understand where you're at in process, right? And you're probably sitting there saying, "I've got my top person," but how are you handling that second and that third person that are kind of not the top person, but you might want to have them? And how do you think, like, do you keep multiple people in process, and how do you bring everybody along?
It's really tough. I mean, it's I know you're familiar with fundraising. It's kind of similar to trying to orchestrate the term sheet. You try to keep all the VCs in lockstep. So for those that haven't gone through fundraising, but maybe have gone through the recruiting, it's really challenging, right? You can't. It's not as easy to get everyone on the same schedule, and you have a candidate come in late that's a great fit, but you have to go through your rounds and do the project and whatever it might be. And so how do you keep those other people on ice? I mean, I think what we strive to do is be as communicative as possible and say, hey, we're, aiming to make a decision, by XYZ date. We are talking to other people. Hopefully that's not a surprise, and, you're here in the process. It ends here. We should know more by this date. We'll be in touch. And so if you stay, kind of keep people connected, and then I'll always ask, I always ask, and our recruiters, I make sure they always ask, like, where are you as the candidate in your process? Like, you should ideally, as a candidate, this is a negotiation, a sales process on your side too. Like, you should keep the employer that you're maybe interested in working with, trying to get you and say, oh, well, I've got, these final rounds here and all that. And so, I think it's a two-way street, and it's, as long as you're as transparent as you can be. In particular, I think in cutting people loose, like if it's not a fit, I don't want people to just be hung out. I think we owe it to every candidate to say, hey, we're not going in this direction. Appreciate your time. If something makes sense down the line, we'll let you know. And thanks for taking some time. So I think that's our aim. Would I say we're always perfect there? No, but we're striving for that. And I know we could always do better, but I think that's the best you can strive for.
I like that. Which you kind of highlighted there is something I think people don't realize is like processes don't always line up between candidates and companies. And it's amazing how every side thinks, companies think that there are 6 people waiting there for them, and candidates think that there are like all of these, just that they're all going to line up. I always give this speech to people. I'm like, when you're graduating from college, like you can line up 4 jobs and have 4 opportunities and that's there. But like the rest of the world is, and the rest of life is not like that. I think you kind of highlighted that like we're going to try, but it may not work on that side.
And especially as you get further in your career, and, I know you and I have both gone through this, but the right opportunity literally may not exist right at that moment when you're, starting to look. And so you kind of have to have, maybe you have your eyes open a bit more, and it might, you might go through a couple of those and then spin off of it, and then, wait till the right one emerges. But it's probably a little easier when you're earlier in your career and you're trying to evaluate, this AE or this SDR role against these 3 or 4 others. Like, I'm going to pick the company, and, I think this person, who's going to be my manager is great, and, whatever it might be. But even then it's hard to align it.
I couldn't agree more. We just dropped an article today on kind of like references, like how do candidates think about that? But how do you think about references? Like I won't color the question with the details, but I'm curious, like, how do you approach it?
Yeah, I'd love to read that article actually, because it's something we think a lot about. So I think
although we did write it from the executive perspective, but I think it's interesting because I think there's a ton written on like companies. How do you do references, right? But I think for the candidate and the exec, it's actually quite hard.
Yeah. So I think I'll give the like company perspective, at least what we do here and how I think about it. And then, happy to hear kind of your side. So we really want sort of back channel. Like I think references are often a formality, unfortunately. And so, the candidate's going to give 2 or 3 great references of people that they're trusted. And they're like, hey, can you do me a solid here? And then we get on the phone and we're like, oh, would you work this person again? Yep, I would. Okay, great. Check the box. And everyone's happy, and you make the hire and you move on. I think the hard part about that, obviously, is that, it's not really doing the job of what a reference check is supposed to be, which is, how, we're sold on this candidate. That's why we're here. How can I best work with this person? What are this person's strengths and weaknesses? Like, here's the company, the job. I'm giving you the 5 minutes or whatever, maybe less overview. Based on that, do you think they like excel here, or like what would they need to do to excel here in your mind? Like, ideally, that's what you're getting out of reference. I think the best way to get answers to some of those questions are by finding someone that worked with them in the past that they didn't necessarily recommend, and ask them. Now, obviously, that person could have hated them for some reason or other, or had their issues or whatever it might be, and so you might get not the most high signal response there. But I think if you can do 1 or 2 of those and really, get an honest or as close to an unadulterated view on the candidate as possible, that's going to give you, alongside the hand-picked references, a bit of a triangulation, on the candidate and hopefully some answers as to how you can best work with them moving forward.
I love it. One of the tactics I've used is doing when I do references is I try to take am I going to hire them or not off the table, right? I'm like, hey, we're pretty excited. We're planning on making this person an offer.
Yep.
What I really want to focus on is how can I work with them better?
Yep.
And I find people open up a lot more then versus like, hey, we're evaluating them and we'd love it, which is also, I think, like, don't do the references too early in the process. Wait till a little bit later on. And then if you wait until later, it's legitimately you're looking to kind of confirm or like see if there's a red flag that comes up. And there I've gotten better. From the candidate side, I always advise them, don't just give 2 or 3, like have like 3 to 4 at every company, star the ones you think could be the best, easy ones, but let them call anybody and do that work for them. And I think then that can be a little bit easier.
Yeah. And I think, before joining Hatch, I think the references were done before I got the offer, our founders were asking people that worked with me, like, what do you think? And I think that's great, right? Like, you might find some people that said, hey, Tim could do this or do that. But, I think if it's almost like treating it as you should talk to people that I worked with in the past, and I don't care, who you talk to, you're going to hear about Tim. That's great. And I like your approach. I did the same thing. I do the same thing of saying, hey, the offer is in hand, basically. So put that to the side. How can I work with this person? Give me advice on, like, they're going to report to me. I'm going to have to work with this person every day. What should I look out for? How can I, get them to be happy and the most productive as possible? Like, help me figure that out. And, I appreciate that advice.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating. I've become friends and built relationships with some of the people. I've done references. I've called for references. I'm like, cool. And it's the little things on that side. Well, maybe let's talk a little bit about, it was fun because you touched on earlier the employer brand, like how you guys there's open AIs of the world. And I do see every time they post something and they're required to legally, it's like 3 days, they get 3,000 applicants and they probably throw them all away.
Close the
And then do the real search. You talked about having to do a little bit more outbound and stuff like that, but do you think about investing in your employer brand? How would you do that? I mean, maybe coming on this podcast is part of it, like helping people understand and like great place, really thoughtful hiring and exposing leadership to you. But how do you think about like building out that employer brand so more people are coming to find you? Or is that something that's as important?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's, from my perspective, LinkedIn's a great, place to do this. And throughout my, career, I've invested there, in fits and starts. And I admittedly haven't invested as much there recently, but I think I should probably do it again because I think if we have these key roles to hire, I've actually heard from almost every senior candidate and a number of the, junior candidates I've spoken to, hey, I saw you posted this on LinkedIn about the company, right? And so I like that, by the way, that you're doing your diligence, as a candidate. But it's clear to me that otherwise they wouldn't have a feel for what we're up to, what I think about and care about and I'm up to without that. So I think that's one thing that I could probably recommend to anyone, and I, to myself included, to go back and be more active there. If you're doing that, I think not only will you potentially attract candidates who see that just organically, but then also as candidates are considering roles and then get into the interview pipeline, they're pointing that and say, hopefully I liked what Tim had to say about this topic. I think that's the direction of outbound, where it's going with AI. He's talking about that. That's cool. I want to be a part of that or not. Right. And so I think that'd be one thing. So that's probably more at the executive level. Maybe you can do that a bit at the company level, but probably more at the like hiring manager or executive level. I think at the company level, it comes down to, fundraising. I think basically fundraising and being considered in the world we play in, the Silicon Valley tech startup type of world. Like, are you one of those companies that's kind of hot? You're going to get more inbound that way. I think we're fine. We are venture backed and we've raised a few rounds of funding. We're fine. I don't know. You might have to strike this in editing. I don't think we've actually announced anything officially about that, but all right, cool. I think you'll find that unless you're one of the top companies, the inbound from like the venture type of announcements is, de minimis unless you're, truly a hot company there. That's how I think about it.
I love it. So say you've hired somebody. What does that first 2, 3, 4 weeks look like for you, and how do you set them up for success?
Yeah. So we're at a fun stage of a business where I think we should strive for onboarding process over the first 2 to 3 weeks and have as much documentation and enablement and training as possible. But we're also 100 people growing quickly. We're not 1,000-person company or 2,500-person company or whatever it might be, where there's going to be more structure and more. Your first week is predetermined by the security training you have to do and whatever else. Like we're more of a fast moving early stage startup, and so I think we strive as a company for kind of having that structure and learning be as hand selected as we can. But we also recognize that the type of people we're hiring, whether it's at the entry level role up to executive role, are going to have to onboard themselves to some degree because we're all moving fast. We're trying to drive the business forward. We have full calendars and countless fires to put out and whatnot. And so anyone that's going to be successful here is going to have the ability to have some agency and say, okay, I'm going to go schedule the call with the CEO on my own to do the 15-minute, this is Hatch and this is our culture meeting, right? Like even the SDR is going to have to say, hey, I'm going to have to, maybe it's easier for the SDR because they're going to be cold calling all day, but I'm going to have to go to the CEO and ask for that meeting and put it on their calendar. Or the, head of sales development is going to have to, schedule the meeting with the VP of customer success on their own without me facilitating it and just do kind of that extra legwork. I think we expect that. And I don't think it's an unfair expectation. So it's a mix of that structured, here's a lot of stuff to read, a lot of things to watch, maybe a lot of people that you should talk to. And then also hey, you're going to come to me and start to guide your own onboarding a bit and say, hey, I don't feel like I know enough about the product. Who should I talk to about this? I want to be checking in with you regularly, and you're kind of giving me kind of the state of where you're at and what you need to do better on.
Love it. Yeah. I think at that stage, it makes total sense. And then as you get more mature as companies, you do that. Have you ever had somebody maybe that's a direct report to you that hasn't worked out, and how do you pick that up in the kind of the onboarding process?
Yeah, I think the easiest signal for me is the kind of bias to action piece. And I think if you're joining a company around our size, growing in our growth rate, the business is fundamentally changing every 3 to 6 months. It's the pace is it's different than a bigger company. It's different than a smaller company that's growing more slowly. And so, anyone that's going to be successful in this kind of environment, has to have a bias to action and move quickly. And so the kind of most telltale sign is, they're just not shipping whatever, on the go-to-market side, it could be they're not getting themselves up to a level where they're performing activities within the first week or two, or they're not coming and asking enough questions and showing enough curiosity of hey, I kind of get this piece, but about the product, but I don't get this piece. Who should I talk to about that? I listened to these 5 calls and I have these 3 to 4 questions about, what I learned there because I don't understand what this means. And I did a prompt in 03 and asked about it. And some of it made sense, but I think there's still a gap and I'm missing it. And here's what it is. So stuff like that, if I'm seeing kind of the bias to action along those lines that I just described, great. If I'm not seeing a lot of that or a lot of hey, I get it, everything's good, I start to worry a little bit. Just to draw a line on that quickly for my own onboarding here, just like most startups, that they're I sat down with one of the leaders here on the go-to-market side. And I was I'm locking you in a room. We're spending hours together because I don't know anything about what's going on in this company. And we're going to start working on this doc together. I'm building questions as we're talking. We're going to go back to these questions. It's, I'm forcing, I had the seat and the kind of authority to do that. But I think anyone can kind of build their own onboarding in that way to help get them up to speed as quickly as possible. And I'd expect that at a stage of business that we're at.
I love that, man. I'm the same. That intellectual curiosity every single step is like so critical. I think no matter what size company you're at. Well, I this has been awesome. Like, are there questions I didn't ask in terms of your hiring philosophy, or a story of somebody, a great hire or a bad hire that sticks out for you that I should have asked?
I think the thing that I'm constantly trying to calibrate on and figure out kind of a question would be, how do you, and I mean you personally, Andy, but just how does one, for let's say an account executive role, mid-market account executive, like how do you identify, the best traits that are most likely to lead to success, in your particular business and what we do? And how do you start to screen for those candidates, all the way up at the recruiting side down to kind of getting to me and getting into the funnel? I think it's a constant, I have some rules I live by and things that I look for, but it's always interesting to me, especially on the sales side of, I've seen so many different profiles of people be successful, from your D1 athletes, to your people who have zero organizational system, but are extremely charismatic, and so the question I constantly ask myself is, how can I get more scientific on this? How can we get, better at the screening piece to then build the best candidate pool possible? I don't know if I have a good answer to that to this day, and something that I constantly think about. So it's almost like I'd pose that to you, Andy, like, what have you seen some of the best leaders do to get as good as they can there?
Yeah. So, I remember when Gong came out for sales calls, and I actually wrote an article before it came out. I was like, I don't know how to manage a team without voice. I think similarly, there's a company called MetaView that's recording and doing the Gong for interviews, and then being able to feed that all back in to learn. But a lot of this is like you said, it's like, I love athletes, and it's like, great, but like that may be a bias of Tim's that's not actually based in reality or fact. And so I think the idea to be able to put metrics on that interview phase is really important. So I've been hearing a lot about MetaView from my network lately. So it could be something.
Well, I'll check that out. I like the plug, and I will take a look.
That's awesome. Well, hey, thank you so much for doing this. I'm excited to get to reconnect. I love seeing all of what you're building. And if people haven't seen Hatch, I think Tim is deeply thoughtful, and particularly building an outbound sales organization.
Appreciate that, Andy. And I would be remiss if I didn't say that we are hiring. Just find me on LinkedIn. Hopefully you'll be able to find the roles we're hiring for, but a lot of open roles in the go-to-market side. So give me a shout.
Awesome. Thank you. Have a great day.
All right. Thanks, Andy.